Maybe I'm not. There we go. Hey guys, welcome back to Navigating Neva, and I am your host, Neva Nicole, with my co-host.
Hey everybody, Wes King here.
And tonight we have a special guest with us. And before we do our introduction and let you know who she is, I wanted to let you know that tonight's topic, we're going to dive deep into what's crucial for everybody in aquatics, in the aquatics industry. And we're going to talk about paid training, staff practices, composition policies, and ethics and legalities.
All the fun stuff that everybody's excited to listen to. We'll make it fun.
Right, we
And
will make it fun.
we will make it fun because of our special guest, Amanda. I definitely am going to let her talk and everybody else talk, but I want to take a moment to give Amanda a lot of credit because I knew Amanda before Amanda was big and famous and starring on podcasts. When COVID started, I was blessed enough to have her as my intern when the world shut down. I was fortunate to have interns, and she got to be on my team, and she developed things like the West King hack and the Aquatic Hero. But not only that, she really helped me and my company and my organization stay founded, stay on the path, stay pivot, whatever the terminology you want to use that we all went through for the 2+ years, 3 years of COVID. Amanda was there. And so to see her blossom into this great, wonderful leader in aquatics and risk management and now move locally, it's phenomenal. And last twist of fate, Amanda ended up working for the first boss I ever had 25 years ago. So just crazy small world. So anyway, Amanda, welcome. Happy to have you. And you are currently the risk and safety manager of the Skokie Park District. And take it from there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I am currently the risk and safety manager for the Skokie Park District, which loves Skokie. I'm really excited to be a part of the Northern Illinois community of park districts. But yeah, it is kind of crazy to have had the same boss, very like decades apart, and then
Yeah.
also to have worked for you and know kind of like your background and where you've been with all of our interconnected things like YMCA, its fitness industry, and all of
Yes.
those like little tidbits. It's very weird how aquatics is a very small community, and yet
Yeah.
there are pools everywhere. Uh,
Right.
so yeah, that is very cool.
Central Illinois strong, girl. That's right. There
Yeah.
we go. So anyway, yes, Nicole, please thank you for that moment, allowing me to kind of share with the world and let a little people inside baseball, as they might call it. So, but yeah, Amanda, Nicole, please get us back on track and as both of you have done so well.
Yes. Well, Amanda, thank you for being here. For our guests that are listening, this is going to be really weird, but she's not on tonight because she knew Wes. She's actually on tonight
Right.
because we live in a social world. And even though I don't live anywhere near these guys, we're all in aquatics. And there was a really not heated, but there was an interesting discussion on a social media network. And I saw Amanda's comment and I thought, ah, what great stuff. We should share all of this with everyone, all of our listeners. You know, some of us are becoming lifeguards and then some of us have kids. And I can tell you my rule as a aquatic manager is if your mom fills out your app for you, I just don't hire you. And I don't want to talk to your parents. I have talked to parents. I've had parents fill out applications, but it's really hard for us to turn our kids to the workforce. And sometimes you want to know, do the people know what they're doing? So this is a good podcast for parents to listen to or lifeguards alike. And then you can always refer people here to listen to the good stuff Amanda's going to share with us tonight. So with that, I'm going to bring us to our first question. So Amanda, we're going to start with the basics. Can you talk about what you've seen or experienced when it comes to unpaid training or undercompensated prep work in aquatics?
I can. So I have a personal example as coming from being a lifeguard when I was 15, 16, and being a swim instructor all the way to being an aquatics manager just a little bit ago. As a lifeguard and swim instructor, when I first got started, it was really common for you to have to pay for your certification. I think it still is really common for you to pay for your first certification and sometimes even those renewal certifications that you get. Sometimes attending mandatory trainings were not compensated for. I started out at a YMCA. I've worked at municipalities, parks departments, park districts. All of them have something in common, which is that there's always a tight budget. So the answer to many people's question of, oh, do I get paid for this is, well, we don't have a budget for that, but you still have to go.
Mhm.
So that's kind of where my first example ever started of not getting paid for training was my first certification class. I had to do it all on my own time. It was spread out over 2 weeks. It was 4 nights a week. And then now, having the experience of being a manager and being told that I couldn't pay for certain trainings for my team, or for instance, when I was a manager of a swim lesson program, we only gave 15 minutes per session to fill out those report cards that parents get. So if you're a parent of a little one and you get those little report cards, and sometimes you're like, why is it generic? Why don't I get like more than a
Right.
checkbox and a little great job, Joey? Sometimes it's
If
because
if it's even Joey's card.
yeah, or if it's even Joey's card, right? So sometimes you don't realize that those instructors are not paid to do that, or they're only paid to come in a couple minutes early. And if an instructor has 35 students in a night, which that could just be 4 classes, so 2 hours, right? Or maybe they're working every night that week and they have 100 report
Hmm.
cards to do. They only get those maybe 15, 30 minutes to do them. They don't have time to be thoughtful and diligent on every single one, not because they don't want to, but because they're not getting paid to do that. So those are like my two biggest examples of like that prep work that's undercompensated for that we still have them do. But then also, I think it's still very prevalent in our industry to not pay people not only for their time going to certifications, but also for the certification themselves. We're still asking them to front the money to have this job, where in many other industries, you think of niche industries like school bus drivers, they are paid for training, they get bonuses. Even though they're working a small amount of
Hmm.
time throughout a day, they're still very highly compensated and they're given that training to do that job well.
You're absolutely spot on. And what's frightening is that when you say it was your first experience, it wasn't just your first experience. It's most people's first experience under this umbrella of first job. It's a different type of job because it's aquatics. And there's training involved. There's training in a swimsuit. There's training with peers, blah, blah, blah. And now I have to front the money. And that's, I think, the second takeaway that I think hits home is just the phrase fronting the money is something a 16 to 18-year-old should never have to say, first of all, or anybody should have to say to go into a job. And I think you make great points of not only the school bus, but truck drivers and post office. You name the industry, training is supported within the operation. It's budgeted, it's reviewed, and it's built in. And so I think you're very spot on in identifying what's missing, but also the personal experience of how do you recover from that and how do you prevent it. So great observations for sure. Which actually leads me to my first question. Look at me remembering my questions. I want credit for that. Both of I'm not going to get any credit for that. How have you worked through that? We know it's there. Why do you think we're still getting away with it? I mean, I know we're not talking legal lawyer stuff, but I know why I get away with it because I cheat, borrow, and steal from the system. But with a part district, everything's tracked. It's all a public record. What do you think? Where do you think people are just going? Nah, we're going to turn away. We're not going to pay so much attention. Why has nobody dug deeper into this? Do you think?
I think it goes to my least favorite phrase in risk management, which is we've always done it this way.
Oh, all
And
right.
when
The
you
less
have
famous
that, and
words of any business.
I heard it
Yeah.
today. I heard
Yeah.
it today right before I did a training today with a staff member where they just said, we've always done it this way. And they're questioning, like, not in a sense of, you know, they're not trying to
Hmm.
harm anyone. They're not trying to, take something away from their staff. They're very genuine. They think that they've always done it this way. That's okay. Because,
Ignorance is bliss. Ignorance is bliss.
exactly. I hear that
Yep.
phrase all the time too. And I think from my perspective, having the background in aquatics management, along with
Mm.
coming up through aquatics as like a part-time staff member up to full-time management. I think people are still getting away with it because they can, because there's a lack of oversight in the aquatics community.
Yeah.
That we have the Model Health Aquatics Code, which does talk about training requirements. We have industry leaders like the American Red Cross, Ellis Lifeguard and Associate, or Ellis and Associates. We have drowning prevention companies popping up everywhere. We have people who are super knowledgeable, who are saying and kind of screaming from the rooftops how to do it the right way. But then you have this gap where you
Hmm.
have the operational gap to the expertise or like the best practices. And I think that so long as we say that training pay is a best practice and not a requirement, and that's the mindset we
Hmm.
have, I think we'll continue to see this problem because the people who are staying in aquatics right now to go to management, full-time management, or even that 35 hours a week manager that works year round, right? When you have that, the people coming up to that position is people who are passionate about it, who are willing to
Hmm.
be underpaid, or you have a person that's grown up through it and will rely on their background knowledge and their experience versus best practices because they know what they've had for the last
Sure.
to 10 years, but they might not realize that the best practice really is like the law. I know we're getting into that later.
No,
Uh,
I think they don't know any different, and as long as they don't know any different, they stay comfortable. And I think another piece of they've gotten away with it, and I tease borrow, cheating, and steal. I tease the idea of saying, well, how am I going to pass my health inspection? Well, the health inspector doesn't care if you paid that person a day; they care that your flow rate's good, right? So that's a section that's, and I'm not blaming health inspection. Well, the lifeguard auditor cares that you have your strap on and you scanned. Okay, well, you check that box. So to your point, I hate to use the word government or a governor, or there's nobody really insisting that all these things that we know we should be doing are getting done. Fair?
Fair. Yeah. Well, what I was going
Yeah.
to say is I have
Yeah,
past
please.
bosses that don't come from an aquatic background. And when you get that, they'll say, well, when we got our inspection, they didn't care. And I'm like, of course they don't care because that's not the box that they're checking. But
Bingo.
we know that they do care. And to Amanda's point, we are. That is actually our point right here. I don't know if it comes up later in the section, but it talks about the Fair Labor Standards Act. So that's a crucial point for all of our listeners and us to understand is that it's important for both the employer and the employees to understand the obligations, or really it's important. Well, and I'm not sure, Amanda, what your background is, but now in the Red Cross book, they seem to be pushing more towards not what the Red Cross says, but they kind of show you who's in charge of what, if that makes sense.
yep.
Yes, and I appreciate that because when I came as a lifeguard at 15, 16, I didn't know who did what. I really just thought my head guard or my boss knew everything. And sometimes these guards go, like my son went, his boss doesn't know anything. So, I mean,
Right. Do we pay him? Don't we pay him?
right,
What can we get
exactly,
away with?
exactly. And
Right?
yeah,
Yeah.
in some small clubs, I see people will straight up say, I do tennis and they told me I get aquatics for the summer. I know nothing. And I'm like, it's okay.
Oh.
I'm here. But you see that a lot.
I mean, I don't want to divert, but let's talk about that. The different industries, right? Golf, tennis, all the sports. It's just kind of ad hoc. Yeah, it's covered. It's not covered. Well, aquatics is different. I have to have a trainer. I have to have a certified. I have to have water. I have to have classes. I have to have education. So, Amanda, how have you kind of worked through that? Whether it's in your current position or how have you had those conversations when they say we don't have the budget for it, and you say you need the budget for it? What's that been like? Again, you don't have to name names or anything, but what's your experience been like having those conversations?
I think, well, I will name names here because I am really lucky at Skokie. So,
Fair.
I'm gonna, I have to,
As a local resident to that, I totally concur. Great place, great people.
it
Sorry.
is a great place. It is
Yeah.
great people. So to be honest, like my role was pretty new to my district. So I have a current
Mm-hmm.
recent example of this, and then I have something from a really long time ago where I will not name names.
Touche.
So currently, with my position being the risk and safety manager, I'm only the second person to hold this as a full-time role. They did have someone part-time in a part-time basis doing my job before me. And they obviously understood they needed someone full-time. I think the culture shift they have of having a
Mm-hmm.
full-time person come in and not like breathing down anyone's neck, but just asking questions of how we do things and letting people know, oh, hey, this law, we can follow it. And when they tell me, oh, we
It's
don't
okay to
budget,
do the right thing.
it's
So I
okay to do
remember,
the right thing, of
yeah,
someone saying it's okay
yeah,
if you didn't budget for this because guess what, we're going to do it anyway.
right.
And knowing, like, I think I have like a ton of full-time support and upper management when I go to them and I say, and this is really crucial, I think this goes back to culture and values of picking the right place to work. When you go to the right place to work and you bring something to the attention of upper management where you can really make those big decisions, where when you have like a $20,000 training hit to your budget, yeah, you can't just do that as like a full-time manager saying, yep, I can be $20,000 over budget. But at the superintendent director level, by saying, or like that overseeing person of that like division, really, that division level supervisor, when you go to them and you explain the issue, you explain the law, and you say, hey, I get this is going to be a lot. It's going to be expensive to do this right. Their first response, I think, that is a really big indicator of if you're going to get somewhere or not, or what the culture is. And if their first response is not, let's do it right, but tell me how we do it. Maybe they aren't the expert in aquatics,
Mhm.
but they might be the expert in finding $20,000. And that might be why they have that
Great.
role. So telling them, hey, I'm not trying to ruin your budget this year, but I'm letting you know that this has to happen. So how can we make
Yeah.
it work? And what that might look like is a little bit different. My last experience, where it did not go so well, I did not get what I was asking for. I felt like we needed to pay staff for a specific training we were requiring. It did not go over well, me telling them that we needed to pay the staff. What I did get the first year, though, was we got to pay them a bonus for going. They didn't cover their time. It didn't really cover a lot else, but they got $100 bonus to go to a class. And I thought that was great. The second year, it was $150. The third year, it was everyone's time, and they got a bonus for completing the class with like a percentage. Like if they scored really high on their test for that class, they got a little bonus for it. So it incentivized them really well. And that took 3 years. That's not instantaneous. And sometimes the solution is not instantaneous.
Mhm.
And yes, there is like the legality of it, but then you have the reality that some people might not be able to get to that point really quickly. So if that's you, I think that something to take away is some progress is better than no progress, but there's people to talk to, and there's oversight agencies like the Department of Labor that can really help you in this instance. But I do think that a lot of organizations maybe are really struggling with the reality of cost.
Is spot on, and I think you're great. And we're hearing this theme, Nicole, as we do these podcasts, is don't barge in like a bull in a china shop, right? Vanessa had talked about it last week, and I think that's too what you're saying, Amanda. And again, knowing you as I do, if you go with the right approach and you read the response and you read the room and you don't expect it to happen overnight, then whether it's the legal part, whether it's the financial part, whether it's the development part, all of those things take time. And the boss just got blindsided by your legality. The boss just got quote unquote blind, even if you've told him 100 times or you showed her the paperwork. To your point, Amanda, if you wait for the response to go, all right, I can work with that. All right, I'd rather have 5% of a watermelon than a full grape. I can live with that, right? And I think that perspective is so important, specifically in this category, because we're asking for things instead of enforcing things, right? We're asking for money, or on things we know we should have money for, or we should have structure for. So I think those are some great observations. Oh, what do you think,
So
Nicole? Good stuff.
that's great stuff. I love it. So
Yeah.
my question is, when you have a guard or a brand new person, let's say my son, for example, he's, 15, 16,
Hmm.
this is his second year guarding, second summer, he's going to come back. If he's being told he has to take training and he's not getting paid for it, what can we tell him? What are things that we can say? How can we direct him?
Yeah.
Obviously, like Wes said, leave your emotional baggage at the door. Don't come in there like a bull in a china hut or china shop. But what professionally can you tell him to say?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think that not only for lifeguards who are coming back, we love high retention. I'm a big believer when you have returning
Hmm.
staff, they are your best recruiters. But also, I think for parents who might be listening, who might have a kid who's has their first job and they don't know what to tell their child, um, when you decide to not go in like a bull in a china shop, I'm always tempted. I'm like a facts person. I want to present the
Hmm.
facts because if I present the facts, they can't dispute it, right? But the thing is, you have to kind of understand your audience. They might know what you're talking about, but how do you tell them? So I always like to go in with, a question and getting the information to that person, the manager, with a question by saying, hey, like, I know we have this training coming up. I was just wondering how we correctly document the hours according to the FLSA. I saw this thing in the FLSA because I was looking at it for, and I always plug in some other reason that's not related to work.
Oh, for sure.
Someone mentioned it on a podcast, or yeah, I know.
I was told you can't hire them until they were 16, or
Right.
all. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Or
yeah.
like
What's the?
my friend told me about this because she works at a different job and she mentioned this to me. I always try to plug in something that's not related to the job because that
Borrowed
kind of
shit and
softens
steal.
it a little bit. And I like to point out that for me, when you come with facts a little bit in that question by saying, I want to make sure I'm following the law, I want to make sure I'm doing my job to help you. So like it's like doing a favor for somebody. I think that when you come at it from that approach and you ask the question, how can I do this really well to follow this law or to follow this standard I heard about? It puts it on the manager to say, oh, right. I can't come back and say we don't do that because you just
Mhm.
told me that it's a law and you know about it. Okay.
Right.
So that might mean that there's a little bit of back and forth. There might be a pause that says, let me get back to you on that. I'm not sure. And there might be a little back and forth, right? But posing it as a question to help them really is, I think, where our younger staff can thrive because they're not going to have to educate that person. We're not saying your 15 and 16-year-old needs to educate a 20 something, 30 something
Right.
manager. We're saying it's on the management team to inform the staff of how to do this correctly. Now, I will say, I think the legality of it is that for the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is what we're talking about with FLSA, is there's four components in order to be paid for work that's not quote unquote work hours. And understanding those is really important. I think that it's really important to look through that law. There's a quick cheat sheet on the Fair Labor Standards Act Department of Labor website, which is super awesome. And I know that there's a lot of resources available in different places, but the Department of Labor website is, I think, the best place to go to get that information.
And I won't steal Nicole's thunder, but I think she's going to have some links later. But to your point, Amanda, you're just a much better person than I am, and anybody listening will know this very quickly. I use the language in return. So if you're telling me we're going to reimburse you, if you're telling me it's going to be a pay cycle, I'll teach the staff or the parents to say, let's look at that job offer and let's pick at each word and ask them what they mean by it. And again, to your point of saying, well, when do I get paid on the 15th if I've already worked these 6 hours in training? How do I get paid? Because I'm as the parent, my kid's going to work for you. When is my kid going to bring a paycheck home so I can stop paying for their gas? And if you're telling it I have to front the money or a swimsuit or the classes first or I have to buy the book first or they have to work somebody out, all these things, then I don't know when he's getting paid. Oh, well, Mr. King, he'll work these hours and these. Okay, well, great. When's he getting paid? Oh, well, let me look up to your point, I take whatever their words are and I put it back on them so they have to own it. So again, finding all the ways, if you don't understand when you're getting paid, what work you're doing, and how you're getting paid for it, anybody listening to this should either call us or to Amanda's point, speak up and use the facts that are in front of you and use the things that are in front of you to get the answers for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nicole, if we had time to just like mention the four criteria for like if it's considered work time or not, I think that's super valuable. I don't know if we
Yeah.
are touching on that in a little bit or not. Um, but in that Department of Labor website, you have like it's called Fact Sheet 22, and in there it talks about attendance at lectures, meetings, and training programs. And it doesn't need to be counted as work time if you can meet four criteria. But if you meet three of the four, it's counted as work time, right? So those four are if it's voluntary, if it's not related to your job, and if you don't have any other work that you're performing, and if it's outside of normal work hours. So unless you meet all four of those criteria, then it's considered work time. So a really good example of this is let's say you have a swim instructor training on a Saturday morning and your staff normally only work Monday through Friday. So we could say it's outside of normal work hours. And you could say that it's technically a voluntary training. They don't have to go, right?
Right.
But it's related to their job, and they might not be doing any other work like cleaning or lesson prep during that time, but it is job related. So you would be walking a very fine line of not paying for that time. Now, if we apply it to lifeguard certifications, technically, if someone's not hired yet, you could definitely say that they have to pay for their own certification. But if you've hired them with the intention of having them as
Because
a lifeguard, then now they're your employee. And
you've
now you're
hired them.
saying,
Sorry. I've been key word because you've hired them. I know, but I think I want the listeners to hear that because of it's not because you're going to hire them, but you've actually completed the hiring process. Sorry, Amanda, you know me, I'm a
no,
butthole
you're
for it, but
good.
I think it's a
It's
key
a great
moment in
point.
that phrase. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, yeah.
No,
Keep
it's a
going.
great point. I think we often think that that first initial certification, I know I, as a manager, kind of always had to put it back on them, being like, because if I didn't have the budget to pay for it, right, I had to be like, well, you're not technically hired till you pass the.
Bingo.
That's how we get aware around that, right?
Bingo. Yeah.
But when you've hired someone, you've completed that hiring process. Now you're responsible for their work time. It
There
is
you go.
job related. It's not voluntary because they have to have it in order to do their job. And it's not really outside of normal work hours because the hours that they would take the class are the hours you're going to ask them to work. Weekends, evenings, that's when we run classes, right? And then they might not be performing other work, but we talked about that is they have to meet all four of that criteria for it to not be work related. And I think my last example for that, which I think is probably the most important, would be for those upcoming managers who are like, I'm going to get my lifeguard instructor certification. And the manager goes, oh, yeah, you can. And we'd love to have you do that. You'll get a pay raise, but we're not going to pay for you to take the class. We're not going to pay for your time. And we're not going to, do any of the mileage or anything like
No
that.
reimbursement for anything.
No
Yeah.
reimbursement. And I think that we really have to sit back and think that the people who are the most willing to work are not the people that confront $500 to $800 for a 3-day weekend class in a different city a lot of times with
Hmm.
people they don't know. And
And to
we're
take off work and to take
and
off
take off
work.
work and they're losing out on that. So I
Yeah.
think that you could say that all four of those criteria apply for the lifeguard instructor class or maybe a water safety instructor class, but because they're not performing any other work, right? It is
Mhm.
job related, but they could say that it's not related to their current job. Maybe it's related to a future job. It is voluntary because they're not being forced to go, and maybe it's outside of normal work hours. But if you boil this down to this is how you retain staff, you need to have, or this is how you train staff internally, you need to have that process in place as a manager. And I think if you're up and coming in the industry and you are wanting to do more, you're wanting to be a leader, those classes are great ways to do it. But put it on your employer because it's a bigger benefit to them. And we're
Oh,
talking per LGI being certified, you're bringing in 20 to 30K a year from having a certified LGI on staff, whether that's in reduced training costs because you don't have to hire someone from outside your company, or it's in just income by offering classes to the community. You're raking in a lot just by having someone on staff who can teach those classes. So I think it's really important to really look at the Department of Labor and really understand that. But I think that's probably enough on the legal aspect of today.
Well, I'm
Um,
actually going to make it a little longer because I
yeah.
I didn't prep you for this, but I do know our listeners, and I wrote down some of these when you were talking, kind of like a quiz for you, like when you do the AED and it's got the true false thing. So without going too much into them, and if you don't know, you can tell us and we'll look it up and we'll put it on. So we do show notes. So if Amanda doesn't have the exact answer right now and you guys are listening and wonder, I do want to put these out there later so that you guys can kind of refer to it. So I have, I wanted to say I'm interested in the area that we're in, but then I thought this is probably applies to everybody. So we have some municipalities, we have some private clubs, we have bases. So around me, there's a lot of stuff. So some of these questions apply to people directly that I know, and I know they'll be listening. So my question is, if they're a contract instructor, so the facility has guards and the facility has everything, but their swim instructors are not an hourly employee, do they get paid for training that's required for the job?
So this is such an interesting question, and I love this. It actually goes down to classification of employee. And a lot of times we are misclassifying contracted employees. So you can look up, it's in the FLSA, Department of Labor, to figure out if you're properly labeled as a contracted employee. But the short answer, is no, because contracted employees are operating on a contract. They maintain their own training and certifications, and that's oftentimes in your contract language. But if you
Hmm.
don't have an actual contract and they're
Bingo.
just paying you as a contracted employee or a 1099 employee, then you really need to look into what benefits you're getting out of that because you're likely not being paid high enough to maintain those certifications on your own. And you might actually be classified by the government as a hourly employee because of that standard. And um, contracted employees, I love this when people learn about hourly versus contracted because you really understand that it's not the employer that gets to decide that, it's the criteria. And if you
It's a
don't
check
meet
boxes.
it's the
Sorry.
check
Yeah,
boxes.
yeah, yeah.
If you don't meet those check boxes, you're not considered contracted, even if they want to label you as such. So it is
Right.
very important to look at that and understand that. So short answer, no, you aren't going to be paid for those trainings. Long answer, look at your contract.
So the next one is, yes, Wes.
Well, I was just going to say that, Amanda, you got to stop giving away house secrets, which is that as the business owner and the business manager, it is our advantage to have you pay your own certification and legally allowed to do that. However, as the employee, you own our rear end because we make money off you when you're certified. So, to Amanda's point, stand your ground. If you're an employee and you're not getting reimbursed or compensated as you're supposed to, use this podcast and use this information to say, hey, I should be getting these things. I should have these resources provided to me because the boss knows they don't want to cut that check. And as long as nobody's going to tap them on the shoulder and make them do it, again, giving away house secrets here, they're not going to. So use this information to your advantage to hold the power in your hand and say, hey, boss, sir, lady, ma'am, Mrs., whoever, this is what you owe me and this is the rules to it. Again, don't tell them I gave you that secret. And Amanda, stop giving away secrets. Sorry, keep
Well,
going.
that's all I do is
Go
give
give away some
away
more
secrets.
secrets. Okay, now go give away some more secrets. Okay.
Okay, so the next one is it's not required. And there are many examples, and there's actually one that I had when I wrote the question down, but I'm going to go back to me when I was a teenager and tell you where I'm asking the question from. So I lifeguarded at a YMCA, and we got certified through the YMCA of the USA, which I think is now YSL or whatever it's called. But I really, really, really wanted my WSI, and I went to take it, and they didn't pay for it because it wasn't required. So, for all my listeners who may have a different example, but the same question, is that true? Is that false? Do they pay for it? Do they not?
So if they didn't ask you to take it and excuse me, my dog is popping up to say hello. Uh,
Oh.
we say hi. So if they didn't ask you to take that certification and you were just like, I just really want this because I know I can go work other places, I know that I can do a better job, and they're not saying, yeah, we want all of our staff to have this level, we want all of
It's
our
not
staff to have this.
required,
Yeah,
right? It's
that's
not
the
required.
required part. So
Yep.
the short answer is no, they aren't required to pay for it. However, there's a big however. If in your job description it states a required certification, they do have to pay for it.
Hmm.
And you're already hired. So that's the big difference is you're already hired and it's required. If they
Right.
list it as a preferred certification before I take that class, I would go and I would say, you list this as a preferred certification. Is there a pay raise, a reimbursement, or
Yes.
are you paying for the class time? And I think that there's a lot of ways, not just to do it legally, but to do it in a way that's like supportive of your staff
Mm-hmm.
even if you have a small budget, and I really want to stress this, even if you have a small budget, there is a way to do this in a way that supports your team. But short answer, if you just really wanted to take it, then you're out of luck on that, on them paying for it.
Dangling the carrot. That's what we call it. Again, I wish the Pat McAfee or somebody would start cutting me off this podcast. Somebody ESPN. Point being is dangling the carrot. As bosses, as executive directors, we do that. We say if you go pay for the certification in 6 months, it's going to pay itself off because you're going to dollar wage. However, to Amanda's point, if it's written in the job description that 6 months ago I hired you and we preferred it, well then now let's look at that job description next time we get hired and say, no, 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 don't tease me anymore. Don't take all the carrot. I want the carrot right now. I want it in, and I'm not going to play this game. And because that's, I mean, we do it. We put it in there on purpose so that we can use it to incentivize you and not have to pay it. Then yeah, we'll pay you more later. But who's going to stick? So anyway, yeah,
Okay, so
no more secrets.
the next one's an interesting dynamic because where I live, there's like 4 or 5 places you can go and lifeguard, and one of them does this and the others don't. So this is, I guess, kind of more for parents. I would definitely say if you're listening. So my question is, if they're not hired yet, is it required? Because I can go here, get hired, and they'll train me. I can go here and I have to be hired to get I have to be trained to get hired. So that's my question. If I want my kid to be a lifeguard this year,
Which comes first, the chicken or the egg?
yeah, yeah.
We love a good chicken and egg problem. This is going to sound really bad, but it really depends on the employer. And that sounds so bad, but here's why.
But it's legit true.
It is really true. So here's why. Because this labor practice is so widely varied now, which is great, honestly, because a lot of people in the industry are moving towards paying for staff. And I think that we're in this tail end phase of the majority not paying, and we're really moving towards paying and valuing our employees. So when you have one place that's hiring and saying you have to be certified before we hire you, they're probably not going to pay for that class. They might pay a reimbursement at some point, or maybe they'll pay
Fair, fair.
renewals or recertifications, we call them. But then you have another place just down the road that's saying, "Oh, you apply, we'll put you in a class right away." And I've worked
Yes.
both. I've
Yeah.
managed at both of those places. Who have those different policies, and I think the reasoning for both of them is budget. But the reason that a lot of staff, a lot of managers or companies or organizations and agencies will pay for it up front for you is because they recognize the time investment to recruit those kids and to
Hmm.
recruit that summer staff is so intense, and they need to alleviate that from that full-time person. So oftentimes it's a way for them to really retain the full-time staff and the full-time manager by saying, we will incentivize your part-time staff as much as we possibly can. On the reverse, I've seen a lot of people burnt out because they can't get people in the door to commit to that class, even if it's a small fee, because whether the community they're in can't afford it or the people they're targeting to go to those classes are just not interested in paying when they could go to McDonald's, get paid training, get college money. They can go to Starbucks and get a 401k working part-time. And there are so many other opportunities out there that aren't as stressful. Honestly, lifeguarding is stress. When you
They
have
don't
those
have to
little
wait for
kids
their
that don't
bonus.
listen.
I don't
Yeah.
have to wait for my end of year bonus to see how many shifts I work to make sure I get all
Yeah.
my kickbacks. Sorry, yeah, there's
Yeah,
layers. Yeah, yeah.
absolutely. So I think it really comes down to where you work. To answer your question, Nicole, and honestly, I am a big believer in choosing where you work, and if you're not happy, there is a place where you will be.
True.
I
I
can
agree
I
with that.
attest to that for both of you, specifically you, Amanda. The big takeaway I heard from you, Amanda, was the fact that when you are applying and when you're working for the job and the certification is on the table or the reimbursement is on the table, know what you're getting into, know what it's going to cost, know what your options are, right? No one's forcing you into the lifeguarding class. If the first time I see you when you apply is class and you fail in class, do I owe you money? Right? If I have out, like, there's so many things that get involved with that. So when you're applying, my takeaway from it is when you're applying and you're interviewing and you're trying to get a job and you're thinking about your next levels, what am I in for? Am I in for 500 bucks up front, or are they going to take care of me? Because the second takeaway I think is if you believe in your culture as an organization, you're going to pay them up front. You're going to understand the stresses of retention. You're going to start believing that if I do it right now, I won't have to do it wrong later. And I think we're, to your point, we're seeing people understand that trend of it is such a pain in the ass to do it wrong once. I'd never want to do it wrong. So let me pay up front. Let me get you on the team. Let me take care of you ahead of time. Let's not worry about all the riffraff of how many hours and how much training so that you believe in me and you tell your neighbor to work for me. And that's a really important takeaway as a management system and a management culture is can we do it right this time so we don't have to do it wrong every summer?
That was great, Wes. So I only have two more questions. Really, it's four though. So the first question, it's got three parts to it because I know all of these listeners are listening. And I want to make sure we're answering their question that way. So as a lifeguard, we have to renew every 2 years. So the question is, if I'm, you didn't pay for it for me to get hired, or maybe you did, but now that it's time for renewal, is it paid for? And the three parts are what if the person's seasonal? Because a lot of our pools close and then they reopen. So those people aren't on payroll until the season comes back. What if they are year round? And what if they're a full time employee? So on all three of those, are we paying for renewals or are we not?
So The seasonal one is, I think, the only one that you get a little bit of that gray area with the legality of it, right? Technically, are they rehired when they have to go to renewals, or are they not? Um,
Did they come off your payroll in the fall? Is that what we're saying, right?
Right. If they're off
Yeah.
your payroll, I think that that's the gray area. Now, I think ethically you pay them and you pay for the class. I think that that's how you do it. Now, I
That's a
always
culture
say,
thing.
because when I have done that and I've had seasonals who have come back in the off season to get recertified, so they don't have to do it in the summer rush, we call it. They come back in like spring break or like April and get it done. They're back on payroll and they're paid for their
Bingo.
time. But if they want to go somewhere else to get it done, I'll take it, but I'm not going to pay for it because I offer
Bingo.
the recertifications on my dime because it's cheaper for me to have an LGI on staff do it than it is for me to pay the cost to
Hmm.
reimburse you for the class. So that's what I would do. Now, year round, I think it's on the employer, especially because that's maintaining their standards. And that's really the key here is if your employee does not renew, who's responsible? And what we say is in an emergency, once your insurance company gets involved, your insurance company is
Oh,
going to go, hey, I need a list of all the certifications for all the staff you had working that day. And if the manager lets someone lapse by one day,
bingo.
it's not the employee's fault, it's the management.
Say it
It's
again.
the
Say it again.
organization, it's the
Say it
agency, right?
again.
And it's on them. It's not on the employee really. And we do try to like shift that to the employee by saying it's your responsibility, you have to do it. But if we let something lapse on our watch, that's our fault. So there's that for year round. And I think for full time, I would be hard pressed to ever want to take an aquatics job that would not pay my basic full-time certification needs. Like, and I'm not even talking about lifeguarding or swim instructor basic
Hmm.
stuff. We're talking instructor, trainer, CPO, there,
Recreation.
yeah, operation training, my ongoing CEU credits. Like, if
Food
you're
service. If you have
invest
food.
in service hours, if you're not going to invest in me, and likely I'm salaried, so I'm not getting paid for all that overtime I'm doing, especially in preseason and during the summer. But if you're not willing to invest in me, are you really a worthwhile agency to work for? And I think that that shows. Now, again, mandatory training that you have to have for your job and that is related to your job, you're required to be paid for your time. The certification fee, you could say that maybe that does not include it because it's not about your wages essentially, but your time, absolutely.
Right.
Your
You're
time is
there.
valuable.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, no to seasonal only because that makes me really sad because it's such a gray area, but yes to year round, yes to full time.
Okay, and the last one, this one's going totally the other way. So instead of asking it from a, if you are a person that does training, this is the question I'm going to ask for everybody out there listening. If I'm an LGI or a WSIIT or anybody offering these classes, since they are clocked in and getting paid, right? We're paying our employees for their training. Wouldn't it behoove these instructors not to cram it into 1 week and to spread it out? So for example, I have a staff member and I want to send them somewhere. If I'm making them come to work for 40 hours, and then your class is also 40 hours that week, that would be a lot of overtime. But if I offered the class, and I like it when I see them this way, when they'll offer a class that's like a Saturday and a Saturday and a Saturday for 3 or 4 weeks, that way I'm only giving my employee away 1 day out of the week. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense because when I was training a lot, I was doing those types of classes.
Bingo. Yeah.
So, I think number one, you get better skill retention when you have that
Oh.
break. And you also have the opportunity. Let's say you have someone who is really passionate, but clearly they need a little bit of work on their skills. You have them in an instructor level class. I'm an IT with the Red Cross, and you have them in that instructor level class, and you're just like, oh, you really just need like a couple days of practice, a couple hours, and you're gonna be
Right.
golden. And when you have like 3 weeks to work with and you call that manager up and you say, hey, can you work with your staff member on this so that when they come to class next week, we don't have this issue? And you obviously would talk to the staff member before you call their manager. But when you do that, and then you have another 2.5 weeks to work with them, it's like awesome because sometimes it's that skill regression because they haven't practiced in a while, or maybe they're seasonal. They haven't practiced for almost a
Hmm.
year, right? When you have a great employee that you want to invest into and you get that little bit of extra time, I think that's amazing. So I'm a huge fan of spreading out the classes. I think that we've focused so much on like, can we get it done fast? Can we get it done quick? How
Yeah.
efficient can I be? That we're really missing that when people have rest and people have breaks, they're actually better at retaining information. And this idea that these like 2.5 day, because it's really 2.5 days that people do these classes in, right? Friday night, Saturday, 12 hours, Sunday, 12 hours, like maybe you get a 20-minute lunch break in there. When you
Mm-hmm.
cram it in like that, they're saying, well, don't you work long hours and don't you want people rescue ready on long hours? Absolutely. If I have someone who's going to pick up a double and work 10 hours for me, even though I don't want them to, but I really need that covered, sure, that's great. But I don't want them learning for the first
Right. Yeah.
time,
It's not that you should be trained.
dehydrated, no
Yeah.
food, no good sleep, and I want them to ace a test and ace all these skills. No, I don't want them doing that for the first time. Spread it out, do yourselves and other people a favor, and, get quality out of your staff. So I think that that is a separately huge issue in our industry of cramming things in as tight as we can. But yeah,
You would
absolutely.
love Tom. You would love Tom Ford because we talked about this last week too about how we're trying to be more efficient without understanding the background of it. Tom had great discussion about that, right? And the training, Nicole. And,
Yeah.
and my last piece of that to take away from you there, Amanda, is that comes back to the thing you said earlier is culture. As a trainer, as a manager, how have I looked at my schedule? How have I looked at my shifts? How have I looked at my plan to allow my instructor, or as an instructor, to look at my schedule and say, am I allowing it to be 4 weeks long, or have I just said I got 3 days? Have I sat down at a calendar and say what weekends, what days, what time can I make these classes happen longer? Can I force it to be an extra few days so that I put it in my calendar that way? Because to your point, a lot of times, well, I have an instructor, I have 8 people, let's run a class. Okay, well, I'll see you in 3 days. Well, that doesn't help anybody. And if we learn that way, then that's how we're going to act later. And I think if you sit down on your calendar and you sit down with your instructors and you sit down with your budget and you believe that it's the right thing to do, then you can actually map it out. It might take till September, it might take a season, but you can actually create these 4 week classes, these 3 week classes that'll help. But you have to be focused with it. And I love the fact that you've put it all in kind of pieces together.
I
Yeah.
want to say, just because I've made a platform for my voice to be heard, for anybody listening, I really like when you spread out the lifeguarding classes, because if you use those study guides, the notes at the end, like
Mm-hmm.
imagine having to do all of those in 2.5 days. Like that would be crazy. But
It
when you
is crazy.
It is.
so I assume they're skipping them. But to back up what Tom and Wesley were talking about, if you do it this week and that week and that week, you do that. And I teach WSI. I'm a WSIIT, and I really like to do them in 3 hour increments. And I think most of the sections are broken down into three. So I mean, I'll do like 2 nights a week after work or after school.
Yes.
And
Mm-hmm.
I feel that that is such a better quality that you're getting with the training. And you've got water time. You're in, like, we're in the classroom for a little bit, then we hop in the pool, and then we're done. It's not like we have to
Yeah.
come back in a hoodie,
Back and
towel.
forth all the time.
Oh, and that's a real learning, right?
Yeah.
When you go to college, when you go to night school, when you go to apprenticeship, that's how it's done, right? For
Yeah.
8 Saturdays in a row or 2 Tuesdays. And so as an industry and tying this kind of we in this podcast, and again, we'll tag every LGI and WSI because I think there's another layer that are listening to this, but we understand what it takes. But now the more we can communicate to our bosses and our senior leaders and our community and our parents to say, advocate for us, advocate for your child's first job, and say, I'm not writing a $250 check for my lifeguarding class until I know where it's going. Or I'm not going to let them sign off on their offer letter until I know when the payment's coming. And all the things that Amanda talked about with the requirements. I mean, that's why we do this podcast, so we can systematically educate the audience and say you have ownership and you have control of it as long as you can go about it the right way and know what you're saying.
Yeah,
Anyway,
absolutely.
So
so
my last question
that's
for
it.
Amanda is, you've given us a bunch of great stuff, but since we could listen to this podcast over and over again, and Wes and I do, we listen to it and then I watch it on YouTube, and then we just like to hear ourselves
I
talk.
make my kids watch it at night before. We don't read at night. This is what the kids watch at bedtime. Parent of the
Hey,
year. Keep
listen,
going.
they need to train them young. You
Step
don't
up,
have to pay them
kids.
because you're the dad.
Right.
Right.
So train
We
them
just
young.
learned this. Quiz on this. Quiz me, Nicole. False. I do not owe my children compensation for rewatching this podcast.
So my question for Amanda is, if the listeners only take away one thing out of all the great things you've said tonight, what is the one thing you really want everybody to hear?
Don't be afraid to speak up for yourself, but know your audience. Know who you're talking to. And you don't always want to burn the bridge with your manager, even if you're right. And I think
Hmm.
at some points in my career, I learned
Great statement.
that a little bit the hard way because I thought, I'm right. And I'm just going
Hmm.
to make sure they know that this is the law and this is how it goes and this is what we have to do, right? But I think that when you know your audience and I think you
Hmm.
know that you want to build that good relationship, aquatics is a small world. Everybody kind of knows everybody. So it gets around if
Proof.
you're like a little bit of a sassy, and I'm a sassy one, so I think it definitely is around that I'm a little bit sassier about some stuff. But when you have that good rapport with your manager and you come at it with a, can I figure this out? Can you help me figure this out? Do me a favor here. I need help. It really sets the tone differently. So how you ask about training, certifications, or just a pay raise, even by saying
Hmm.
like what value you have to the organization, I think that matters. I think that knowing your audience is what I would say to take away from tonight.
And to just affirm that, Amanda, I remember we had lunch at B Dubs when you first started this
Yeah.
job, and you talked about your approach. This is a new position. I knew people that have been in that park district forever, and I know people that have positions like yours in other organizations that it didn't work out. And I just affirm and confirm what you just said is your ability to navigate navigate the process of listening, understanding the audience. Right? We all have the old Keith with the cigarette and the beer belly running the pump room. I'm not, but you got through him. And you got through everybody because you understood how to approach and ask the right questions and not be afraid of saying, this is what I understand. What do you understand? Help me understand. And I just really love seeing you mature into that and build on that in your career.
Well,
So
thank
spot on.
you.
Yeah.
We could have a whole podcast on how to talk to your manager.
And, or not to possibly
Oh,
as
yeah, and
well.
how not
That
to, for
I could
sure.
lead that. Yeah, yeah, I'll lead that for sure. Very good. Again, this has been so just such a pleasure seeing you develop, and Nicole. And I love how you guys met, and I love how we got here. So this has been awesome. Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I feel that this has been a very enlightening conversation.
Yes.
And I know that I threw you ahead of some people that were on our guest list to come on, but I really, really felt it was important that as people were training, hiring, getting back, that this podcast was out there. So you kind of jumped ahead in the list, and that's why. So I really appreciate you. And
Of
we're going to share it with
course.
everybody because they should
Yeah.
keep it.
Well put, well said, and it covers a lot of bases from parents to staff to trainers. So I think we hit a wide audience to say. So well done, everybody.
We did.
Yeah.
Well, to our listeners, thank you for thank you for tuning in. And we hope that you found value in today's episode. Please like, share, and send this to somebody who needs to hear it. Maybe even your boss.
Ha!
As always, follow us, drop us a private message, or if you have ideas for future episodes, of course, we're open, or I might just listen to them when I'm out on the internet not trolling, scrolling. Until next time, have a safe time, enjoy summer, and of course, we went zero drowning, so tune back in next week for our new guest. Take care, y'all.
Thanks, everybody.